Welcome back to the Ultimate Trumpet Podcast. I'm Adam.
And I'm Bella. And today we are getting into something that I think is going to ruffle some feathers in the brass world, in the best possible way.
That's right. Today's episode is based on a Studio Notes article written by Michael Droste over at trumpetstudio.com. And the title alone tells you this is not going to be a typical podcast episode. The article is called What Arnold Jacobs Actually Said About Breathing and What Got Distorted.
And when I first read that title, I thought, oh, this is bold, because Arnold Jacobs is one of those names in the brass world that people treat almost like a religion. You don't question Arnold Jacobs. You quote Arnold Jacobs.
Right. It's like questioning a sacred text.
Exactly. And Michael's article does something really brave and really important. It says, look, this man was brilliant. His ideas were sophisticated and carefully reasoned, and what most people are passing around as his teaching is a simplified, sometimes backwards version of what he actually meant.
And Michael is not saying this from the outside. He was in the Chicago brass world during the years when Jacobs was still actively teaching. He knew people who studied directly with Jacobs. He was in those conversations, the real ones, after rehearsals, before concerts. So this isn't speculation. This is insider knowledge from someone who was there.
Which is exactly why this article hit differently than the usual Jacobs commentary you find online. So let's get into it. And I want to start at the very beginning because Michael opens with something that I thought was just perfectly stated. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, nobody set out to distort Jacobs' ideas. It happened through 40 years of retelling, summarizing, quoting out of context, and passing his concepts through dozens of different teachers and players.
That's such an important point. This wasn't malicious. It's just what happens to any complex idea when it travels through enough hands. It gets sanded down, the edges come off, the qualifications disappear. And what you're left with is something that sounds like the original but functions completely differently.
It's like that game of telephone. By the time it gets to you, it barely resembles what was said at the beginning.
And the stakes are high, because we're talking about how people actually practice and teach. If the distorted version is what's in the studio, players are being shaped by something that isn't what Jacobs intended.
So Michael gives us some important context right up front about who Arnold Jacobs actually was. And I think this matters because sometimes the mythology of a figure gets so big that we forget the actual human being and the actual career.
Right. So Jacobs played tuba in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for 44 years. 44 years. That is one of the most distinguished orchestral careers in American music history. And during that career, he became one of the most sought-after brass pedagogues in the world.
Players were flying in from Europe and Japan to spend an hour in his studio. His waiting list was long. And what made him unusual as a teacher, this is the part that really sets him apart, was that he used scientific equipment in his teaching.
Spirometers, respiratory monitors, airflow measurement devices. He collaborated with pulmonologists. He understood the mechanics of breathing at a level that most musicians never come close to.
And this is actually where a lot of the distortion begins, which is kind of ironic, because the things Jacobs said about breathing were precise and contextual and carefully qualified, and the things people remember and repeat have been stripped of all that precision.
You take something that was built on scientific rigor and decades of observation, and you boil it down to a catchphrase. And you've lost almost everything that made it valuable in the first place.
Which brings us to the big one, the phrase that everyone knows, song and wind.
Okay, so if you've spent any time in the brass world, you have heard this phrase, song and wind. It's the title of the book compiled from Jacobs's teaching by Brian Frederickson. And it has become the shorthand summary of everything Jacobs believed. Song and wind. Think about the music. Move the air. Simple.
Except, and this is the core argument of Michael's article, Jacobs never meant it to be simple. He meant it to be a corrective.
This is such an important distinction. A corrective. He was pushing back against something specific. He was pushing back against the widespread tendency among brass players to become obsessed with the mechanics of their own bodies, to think about the embouchure, monitor the tongue, focus inward on the physical apparatus, rather than outward on the musical result.
And he believed, based on his work with biofeedback equipment, that when players focused on the music rather than the mechanics, the body tended to self-organize more efficiently. The neurological patterns that produce good playing were more reliably triggered by musical thinking than by anatomical thinking.
That is a very specific claim, and it is not the same as saying just blow and don't think about technique.
Not at all. It's saying that for most players, most of the time, directing attention toward the musical goal is more productive than directing attention toward the physical process. Those are genuinely different things.
But what got popularized was the simplified version. Think about the music, not your body. And while that's not wrong exactly, it got applied in situations where it was completely inappropriate.
Students with real embouchure problems were told to stop thinking about their embouchure. Players with genuinely inefficient breathing mechanics were told to just move the air and trust the process. And the nuance got lost, that Jacobs was describing a pedagogical tool for players who were overanalyzing. Not a universal prescription for every player in every situation.
And this is so frustrating because the tool works great when it's applied to the right problem. Tell an over-analytical, tension-ridden player to stop monitoring their face and start thinking about the music. That can be transformative. It breaks the cycle of self-conscious interference.
But tell a player with a real structural embouchure problem the same thing and you're not helping them. You might actually be making it worse by convincing them they shouldn't address the real issue.
The tool got mistaken for the whole toolbox.
Perfectly put.
Okay, so let's talk about the air piece specifically, because this is another one that got badly distorted. Jacobs talked extensively about air, about volume of air, about moving air through the instrument, and this became, in popular retelling, a near-religious emphasis on blowing hard and blowing a lot.
Fill the horn with air. Big breath, big sound. More air solves everything.
And Jacobs did believe in full, efficient breathing. He absolutely did. But he was very specific about something that almost nobody talks about when they invoke his name. And Michael really zeroes in on this. Jacobs distinguished between the volume of air available and the pressure of air delivered.
He was not a proponent of blowing hard. He was a proponent of playing efficiently with a full reservoir.
He used the analogy of a garden hose versus a fire hose. The point wasn't the pressure. It was having enough water available to do the job. Keep the tank full. That doesn't mean blast everything.
And this really resonates with me because I've definitely been in situations, especially early on, where I interpreted use more air as blow harder. And that is the wrong lesson entirely.
Most of us have been there. And the high-pressure blowing that some players adopted in the name of Jacobs would have driven him crazy. He knew from his instrumentation that excessive pressure upstream often resulted in less efficient tone production. The body under tension doesn't play better. It plays harder. And those are not the same thing.
Playing harder is not playing better. That might be one of the most important sentences in this whole article.
Write that one down.
Seriously.
Now, this is the section of Michael's article that I think is the most nuanced and probably the most important for teachers and serious students to sit with. The embouchure question.
And this is where Michael says things get genuinely complicated and where the Jacobs mythology has done some real damage.
So here's the situation. Jacobs was skeptical of embouchure-heavy teaching. He had seen too many players paralyzed by analysis of their lip position, their mouthpiece pressure, the precise shape of their aperture. He believed that for most players, this kind of microscopic focus on the embouchure was counterproductive.
So this gets generalized into, Jacobs didn't believe in embouchure work. Jacobs thought the embouchure was irrelevant. You should never think about your lips or your face.
And that is not what he believed.
Not at all. He worked with players who had genuine embouchure problems caused by physical structure or injury or bad early training. He didn't wave those away with just play the music. He addressed them. He just believed the work should be efficient and purposeful, and then left alone.
There's a huge difference between a teacher who doesn't believe in embouchure work and a teacher who believes it should be done judiciously and then set aside. Jacobs was the second kind.
And this matters so much for how we approach students. If a student has a genuine mechanical problem, you can't just redirect their attention to musical imagery and expect the physical issue to resolve itself. Sometimes you have to go in and fix the thing.
Jacobs knew that. He just also knew that most players spend way too much time on the physical apparatus and not enough time on music. He was correcting an imbalance, not eliminating the need for technique.
Context is everything, and every time that context gets stripped away, you lose the wisdom.
Okay, this is my favorite section of the article, and I think it's the most underrepresented piece of Jacobs's actual teaching. Michael talks about what Jacobs understood about the nervous system, specifically about habit formation and the role of repetition in building reliable playing patterns.
And this is where Jacobs was genuinely ahead of his time. He understood at a fairly deep level, deep for a musician of his era, that what we're really doing when we practice is training the nervous system. We're not just building muscles, though that happens too. We're building neural pathways, grooved automatic responses that fire without conscious effort.
The goal of practice, in his view, was to make the right responses automatic, so that in performance, the conscious mind is free to focus on music rather than mechanics.
And this has real implications for how you practice that I think get completely lost when you just say song and wind and leave it at that.
Right? Because if you're training neural pathways, if every repetition is literally grooving a pattern into your nervous system, then sloppy repetition is actively harmful. You're not just wasting time, you're building the wrong patterns.
That's a scary thought.
It should be, because most of us have spent time running through passages without full mental engagement. Just getting the fingers under it, as they say. And Jacobs would say, you're not getting it under your fingers, you're getting it into your nervous system, and if you're doing it sloppily, that's what you're installing.
Mental engagement during practice is not optional. It's the mechanism by which the practice actually works.
And this connects back to the performance anxiety piece, too. He understood that under pressure, the automatic responses you've trained either hold or they don't. If you've built solid, reliable neural patterns through engaged, intentional practice, those patterns are there for you when it counts.
And if you haven't,
then no amount of musical thinking in the moment will save you.
the song and wind shorthand doesn't capture any of this. It makes Jacob sound like he was just saying, relax and play musically, when he was actually making a sophisticated argument about how neurological habit formation interacts with conscious attention.
Which is a completely different thing, and a much more powerful thing.
Now, Michael is careful here to be fair about this. He's not saying the simplified version of Jacob's teaching is useless. He acknowledges that it helped a lot of players.
And it did. Telling an over-analytical, tension-ridden trumpet player to stop thinking about mechanics and start thinking about music is often exactly the right intervention. It breaks the cycle. It gets the air moving. It gets music happening. And sometimes that really is all somebody needs.
The problem isn't that the simplified version doesn't work for some players in some situations. The problem is that it got elevated to universal principle when it was never meant to be one.
And Michael makes this really important observation about what Jacobs was actually like as a teacher. He says Jacobs was a master diagnostician. He prescribed different things to different players based on what he observed. Some players needed more technical work, some needed to get out of their own heads, some needed physical retraining.
He was not a one-size-fits-all teacher, and flattening his work into a single slogan does his legacy a disservice.
The players who worked with him directly always came back with something specific, something he had identified in their playing that nobody else had seen. Not song and wind as a general principle, but a precise observation about what was interfering with their efficiency and a targeted approach to fixing it.
That's what made him exceptional. Not the phrase, the diagnosis.
And we've all had teachers like that, or been lucky enough to have had one, where they just see something in your playing that nobody else caught, and suddenly everything makes sense.
That's the real gift of a great teacher, and that's what gets lost when you reduce a great teacher to a slogan.
Okay, so let's bring this home, because Michael doesn't just leave us with the critique. He gives us a real practical framework for applying what Jacobs was actually teaching, not the bumper sticker version, but the real thing.
And I love this because it makes the article actionable. It's not just historical correction, it's usable in the practice room today.
So first, practice with musical intention from the start of the warm-up. Don't just run exercises mechanically. Have a sound in your head. Have a phrase. Give the nervous system something musical to organize around. This is the legitimate core of the song idea.
And this is something that I think is genuinely hard to do consistently, especially when you're warming up and you're tired and you just want to get through the long tones. But the mental engagement is the point. If you're not engaged, you're not really practicing in the Jacobs sense.
Second, keep the air flowing. Take full breaths not because you need to blast, but because playing on a depleted air supply creates tension and inefficiency throughout the whole system. The reservoir matters, not the pressure.
Third, and this is the one that I think is most countercultural given how his teaching got distorted, if you have a real mechanical problem, address it directly. Don't just blow through it and hope the music fixes it. Jacobs wasn't against technique work. He was against neurotic technique obsession. There's a difference.
Fix the thing, fix it efficiently, then let it go and play music. That's the sequence.
Fourth, take repetition seriously because you are training your nervous system every single time you pick up the horn. The quality of your attention during practice determines the quality of the patterns you're building. This is not optional.
And fifth, be skeptical of anyone who tells you a great teacher's ideas can be reduced to a phrase. Song and wind is a beautiful concept. It's also an incomplete one. The full version of what Arnold Jacobs taught is more nuanced, more demanding, and frankly more useful than the version that's been circulating for 40 years.
That's the challenge and the invitation right there.
You know what strikes me most about this article, and about Arnold Jacobs as Michael describes him, is that the man was genuinely interested in the truth of what was happening. He brought instruments into the studio because he wanted to know what was actually occurring, not just what it felt like from the inside.
And that's a model for how we should all approach our playing and our practicing. Not with dogma, not with slogans, but with honest curiosity about what's actually working and what isn't.
Be your own diagnostician, which is easier said than done, but that's the direction to move in.
Michael Droste's full article on this is up right now at trumpetstudio.com in the studio notes section, and it is absolutely worth reading in full. There are layers in the writing that we've touched on today, but there's even more in the article itself, especially his personal reflections on the Chicago brass world and the conversations he was part of during those years. That insider perspective is something you really can't get anywhere else.
And while you're over at trumpetstudio.com, if you need the latest practice material, be sure to check out the Ultimate Warm-Up Book for Trumpet and the Ultimate Technical Study for Trumpet. If you're getting ready for the gigging season, don't forget your copy of the Ultimate Wedding Book for Trumpet. All three are available right there on the site, and they are the real deal. Built by a working professional who has been in the trenches for decades.
And if this episode gave you something to think about, if it changed how you're going to approach your next practice session or how you think about what you've been taught, please take a moment and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It genuinely makes a difference in how the show gets discovered, and it takes about 30 seconds.
We read every single one and they mean more than you know.
Arnold Jacobs deserves better than a 2-word slogan, and so do you as a player. Go back to the practice room with fresh ears and honest curiosity.
Now go practice!